Well, that's protesters in New York chanting Tyre Nichols, say his name. Well, the Scorpion unit was set up by Memphis Police Chief Carolyn C.J. Davis in an attempt to reduce the crime rate. But its zero-tolerance approach is now in the spotlight. Until last week's incidents, many had considered the unit a success. Cheryl Dorsey is a retired LAPD sergeant and a civil rights author.
Well, it's reported to have been successful. I think it's only been in operation for about a year. And during that time, I believe it's reported that the officers made about 500 arrests. So they were pleased.
But it has now been disbanded. Are you surprised at how quickly that move has been made?
Not really, because I believe that the police chief Davis is really in trying to rehabilitate that department and in damage control mode right now. She's well aware that those officers and it's about 40 officers that are on this elite task force, many of them were on scene for the fatal beating of Tyre Nichols. And I believe some of them who probably haven't been fired yet but are facing disciplinary action probably gave false and misleading statements to an internal investigation, which makes that a terminable offense. And so disbanding the unit made sense, but those officers are still currently on the department. And there are officers, I'm sure, that work in patrol that were on scene that are still on the department. So for me, it's window dressing.
Let's talk about the police chief Davis, because tell us what we know about her, and are you impressed that she has acted so swiftly?
Well, before I started to hear all of the details about what went on after the detention and hospitalization of Tyre Nichols, I thought, well, this was really a good thing. She acted swiftly. But now I know that I feel like she has ulterior motives. I understand that she serves at the pleasure of the mayor. This was a very big deal. These officers were young on the department and really had no business working in that specialized unit. It's reported that there have been several complaints lodged against those officers. And so if that is true, and she was aware, she should have been, because she's the police chief and all of this is happening on her watch, she allowed those officers to remain on that special task force until something so significant that made national news happened, and now she's got to act. She's playing catch up.
Talk to me about your thoughts about watching that horrific video footage, which so many of us have now seen. How is it that, well, human beings, but police officers as well, in the position they're in, can behave like that? Just try and give us some kind of insight, if you think you're able to, about how that happens, how they get to that point.
Well, what happens is when you have officers who work in a small specialized unit like those officers, they are camaraderie builders. And so they kind of become like a little family, if you will. And they kind of act alike, they move alike. You want officers who think alike. And I think what happens is that officers start misbehaving and engaging in police misconduct. And when it goes unchecked, they just push the envelope further and further. And once they get involved in a situation like we saw with the Tyre Nichols incident, officers get tunnel vision. They get very amped up. They get very excited. Adrenaline is pumping. And then it becomes what I like to refer to as a wolf pack mentality. Everybody is in a frenzy. And we see officers arrive on the scene even after Tyre Nichols is already down on the ground and really incapable of even standing. But yet these officers come on scene and they immediately join in the beating. It's something that's really hard to understand unless you've been a part of that police culture. It happens routinely at the end of foot pursuits where you have someone who's being assaulted for running, who's being punished. And that's why it's so important to have a senior officer there, someone with some experience, or more preferably a supervisor, a sergeant, who can manage the incident and ultimately control the use of force that's being disseminated.
I mean, the fact you say this happens routinely is just utterly terrifying. How is that? Because there is a sense of impunity amongst many police officers, because in the past they have seen other officers get away without criminal charges or without losing their job when there have been similar incidents of people being brutally beaten whilst being pulled over in a routine traffic stop.
Well, that's a part of it, but really it's just the police culture, and it's a terrible thing to have to admit, but there is an unwritten, unspoken rule on the LAPD and probably other departments as well, that if someone runs from you and you catch them, some officers will beat them, they will punish them. And we see that time and time again. And the excuse that's given is, well, the person didn't comply. They didn't follow the officer's order or directive. And so with that comes punishment.
How do you change that in a police force? How do you break that down? If that culture is so embedded, how does it change? Because we have spoken so many times about particularly young black men who have lost their lives at the hands of police officers in routine traffic stops. How do you change it?
There has to be accountability. Officers have to understand that that kind of behavior will no longer be tolerated. And if you don't do anything to deter that bad behavior, well, then what have officers learned? They continue to misbehave. They live to offend again. And one of the things that is very important, and legislators are talking about this here, is ending what we call qualified immunity. And what that does is it really provides a shield of protection around officers who do misbehave. You may lose your job, and you may go to jail. There will probably be a civil suit where there's a large financial settlement given to the family. But absent going to jail, absent losing your job, a financial settlement is really on the shoulders of taxpayers. So there's really not a significant consequence in my mind and the mind of others. And that's why so many are asking for President Biden to get the George Floyd Justice and Reform Act passed through our Congress. The Republicans are against it, but we need to have that passed, when that would include ending qualified immunity.
Do you think that any of this is to do with race, or do you think it's all to do with power?
It has to do with power. I say it all the time. Officers who are drunk with power engage in these kinds of activities. We seem to see more white males engaging in this kind of activity only because it's more of them on these 18,000 police departments. Certainly on the Los Angeles Police Department, Blacks make up about 9%, and that's not unique to police departments across the United States. And so it's just more male whites that are out there patrolling the streets, and you have a select small group, I believe, who are misbehaving, and they're the ones that are getting all of the attention. They're doing it over and over and over. I believe for the most part, most officers are conducting themselves appropriately, professionally, and ethically.
And that was Cheryl Dorsey, a retired LAPD sergeant and a civil rights author.